Die Frankfurter Buchmesse 2008, die Faszination Comic. Wir berichten live in Bild, Text, Ton und Video von dieser Leitmesse, die in diesem Jahr ihr 60. Jubiläum feiert.
So, nice to have you here. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
So you're an American, and I heard you grew up with American comics in the beginning, but then you, at an early age, switched to European comics. How did that happen?
My father taught French at the University of Montana in the United States, and he had to be the chaperone for an exchange program to France once when I was 7 and then once when I was 15. And on both of those trips, we would walk into a bookstore in France and see all these amazing books, which in America at that time, you would walk into a magazine store and there'd be what we call a spinner rack, which is just a vertical rack with little flimsy comic books, which were great and I loved them, but when I went to France, it was like a whole new world of just amazing, variety and hardback, which was something I'd never seen before, a hardback comic book. And just a really, really great, amazing. And I'd seen Tintin in the States, but I'd never seen like Lucky Luke or any of the more, Asterix really, hadn't really seen until I came over. And I think I remember being really impressed by an anthology magazine, I think it was called Circus, French anthology magazine in the 70s, 80s. Yeah, but anyway, that's what did it. Several trips when I was a kid over here, and I kept reading American comics. It wasn't like I just switched over, but my mind was broadened by that experience.
So not many artists can live from their art, and along that you didn't have that level of success through all your career. So how did your parents react when you told them, I'm going to be an artist for a living?
I think I'm very fortunate in that I have parents that have always been supportive of what I wanted to do. Their main concern was that I was happy. And my mom would fret about not having enough money for, whatever, paying the bills or buying dinner. But she never like tried to force me or she kept most of her concerns to herself. And I really appreciated that, especially in retrospect now looking back as an adult, I see the kind of support that they gave me, and that's part of what allowed me to
Not many people have that.
Yeah, I guess not. I consider myself very fortunate. So it has been a struggle, I will say, financially, and it continues to be. It's not an easy, especially if you work slowly as I do, it's not a very easy profession to, make a lot of money in.
Talking about working slowly, so you started Berlin in 1995, something like that?
96, I think. 96. So 12 years ago.
So what's so time consuming about this special material?
Well, originally, when I started out, I wanted to have it come out quarterly, so a chapter 4 times a year, which I actually did the first year. I actually got 96 pages done in 1 year. And then at the end of that year, that was not making enough money for me to live. So I had to start taking on other paying jobs, whether they were paying art jobs or washing dishes at a restaurant or whatever. I had to find other jobs. And then that took away work time, and then my productivity slowed, and then I was making even less money from the comic books. So I had to take up more, so it was kind of a terrible downward spiral where I kept on having to do non-comics work in order to pay the bills. And then the other problem I had was one of self-discipline, where I would get a check from my publisher, which, twice a year I would get a check from my publisher. And then I basically say, hey, I got paid, and I would live on that for 3 months or 4 months, and not really work that much, because I finally got paid. Because it's a horrible system where I would work, for 3 months on a chapter and never see any money, so I'm not getting a regular paycheck. It's only, in my case, I would only get paid 3 months after publication. So it was really hard. That timing was a really difficult thing to make work financially.
That's something that many young German comic artists have to learn the hard way, that you are not going to a publisher and sit in an office and do your drawing, and at the end of the month you get your paycheck.
Right.
But you have to sell yourself in that direction.
I would actually love to see more of that system, where there actually were more, and maybe some still do exist, but I would love to see more of an office or studio system where a publisher has like a stable of artists and writers that they keep in house, and then they can come up with projects and develop them. Like I kind of love that model, both for the benefit of being able to be in a group working environment, which I think can be really great because most cartoonists that I know work in solitude. You know, some people I know share studios, but to have that kind of working environment and to actually have it be like punch the clock and get a regular paycheck. I mean, that would be phenomenal. That's sort of, in a way, that's sort of my ideal job when I picture it. And now I'm teaching. Now my living consists of making comics part-time and teaching part-time, and I'm teaching comics. So these things feed into each other very well, and I get the benefit of that community, you know, a whole bunch of people excited about making comics. So now I found a way to get that. But for many years, you know, very much felt like I was working by myself, and that gets to you after a while.
So you're working about Berlin. Have you ever been to the real Berlin yourself?
Yes, I have. I had not when I started the book, and I did not go until I had finished, I think, the 6th chapter, because I wanted to have a really solid mental image, like my own personal, however inaccurate version of what the city might be. And I really wanted to have a really good idea of that based on all my research and looking at, trying to imagine that time and place before I set foot in the actual place, because the place today I knew would be very different than the place that it had been, and it would be so much more complicated and real and alive that I would feel probably, I think it might have frightened me away from the project, you know, because it's a challenging proposition to try to capture something like that, especially as a foreigner, you know, with very little experience in that city.
So Berlin is situated in the end of the Weimar Republic, and Houdini is in a quite similar time frame. What is your fascination with this time? What do you think is special about it?
It's a good question. I don't particularly, you know, I've chosen Berlin as like it's going to be about around 600 pages when it's all done. Excuse me. And when I set out to do the project, it was a very impulsive decision. It was not like a very well thought out. I just thought I'm going to do a 600-page book about Weimar Berlin, and you know, and that requires an enormous amount of time and effort and research. And so an enormous part of my career is now defined by that choice. And then I did the Houdini book because I'd always been interested in Houdini. It wasn't really about it's partly about the time period. And now that I'm talking about it, I do see that there are some things that I definitely responded to. One of them would be the way people communicated to large audiences, which is very different than it was now. You had to stand up and yell. You know, now there's so many other ways that you can get a message across, whether it's radio or the internet or film or whatever. Like there's so many other possible avenues of communicating. But back then, you know, to really get a crowd going, you would stand up someplace higher where they could see you, and you would talk. So you had to, and that notion, of somebody, the capacity to do that in an individual, and Houdini's a great example because he could do that. He was a real showman. And then there are several historical figures that show up in Berlin that do similar things. They get up and speak to large groups of people. The act of doing that, I think, is a really interesting one that is very much non-existent these days, I think, at least in America. In my experience in the United States, it's not as present. And then the participation of the crowd is the other thing that I find really interesting. When you read accounts and you see footage of the time, how responsive the crowd is, and how they would be riveted by whatever. If somebody today stood up and gave a speech that like Talmud to his communist followers, at the length that he gave it, nobody would pay attention after a little while, because the attention spans are different, you know, people. And Houdini, there's this amazing story about Houdini who, he did this act where he would go up on stage and then he would lock himself in a trunk and then would close the curtain. And for 2 hours, he would move around. He would actually get out really quickly, but they wouldn't move the curtain, and he would pretend that he was still inside the trunk, and then he would make noises of struggle, so the crowd could hear him, and imagine that he was trying to get out, but they weren't seeing anything. And for 2 hours, the crowd would sit there, like shouting and yelling and, you know, being really excited because they thought that he wasn't going to be able to escape. And that idea, like, of people sitting in a theater looking at a curtain riveted for 2 hours is fascinating. So there's lots of things.
Can't imagine that happening today.
Yes, no, it's a little hard. I mean, people have other things that they want to do. And then the other thing I think about that particular period is like what was happening with technology and changes that were occurring in the way that, you know, the idea of, you know, especially in Germany, the idea of a republic, you know, in the wake of a monarchy as a whole. Amazing, not only like, you know, reading a history book as an American, you think, oh, like 2 political systems, you leave one and you move on to the next one, and not thinking at all about what that means in terms of this a body of people who believe and act according to a certain long-standing system, and then all of a sudden have to adapt to a new one, and how that transition is not at all easy or desirable for a lot of people. And that was very, very fascinating to me. So I mean, there was a lot, in retrospect, there's a lot of things about it that interest me, and all of the things that I think a lot of people are generally drawn to that period for, I think, are more about aesthetics. Like, people respond to Art Deco as a design movement, and the clothing, and you know, the music, and the idea of like flappers and jazz, and there's this kind of surface aesthetic that a lot of people respond to when they like the 20s and 30s. And I love that. It's a very appealing thing that I actually, you know, when I was exposed to that when I was younger, I really was attracted to it. But now, as an adult, that's more, to me, that's just like set dressing. That's like, that's what I put in there to make it look as authentic as I can. But what I'm really interested in is what's going on beneath the surface there.
So to make it look as authentic as possible, do you have anybody in Germany to help you to research things, or?
Now that I'm being published with Carlson, I do have some people helping me out, and who will also point out errors in the existing work. And there was an instance in the first volume where I drew a train station that was completely wrong, and Carlson sent out a photographer to take pictures of that very train station and get them back to me so that I could make it more accurate. And then there's a journalist named Lutes who lives in Berlin, and he has been really amazing in terms of like figuring out where a certain building would be that I needed, or, you know, whether or not a particular neighborhood would have had the kind of you know, health clinic that I think that it would have. So I do have now. When I started out, I didn't have anybody here to help me out, but now that I've made connections and I have a publisher in Germany, they've been incredibly helpful in finding my foolish mistakes and helping me find specific details that I need. And for the last volume, they're going to be very helpful because there's a number of things that I won't be able to do without the help of people here. I don't speak German myself, so I can't, you know, the text or read German. So all of my research has been through English language writing, and obviously that leaves out a vast quantity of German history. So there are some specific subjects or specific aspects of things that are vital to the last book as I'm working on it, and I'm going to ask for help from Carlson on those.
So for errors in the previous books, do you correct them, or do you leave finished work stand as a finished work?
Well, between the English edition comes out first, and that goes to my English publisher, my North American publisher, and then he basically just proofreads it. He doesn't make any content change suggestions, and he doesn't know anything about the visual stuff, so he can't change that. So that, once that goes to the proofreading stage, that goes to press. And then Carlson, in this case with the most recent book, Carlson got the digital files as the book was going to press in North America. And then as they were doing the translation and reading through the whole thing, they very, very carefully, you know, tried to find any like outstanding detail that was noticeably wrong. And they did things like, you know, I have a number of historical figures actually speak at length about various subjects, and in my writing, I would read a bunch of that of a given writer and then try to synthesize or distill what they said and try to make it, try to shorten it into more coherent, like smaller bits of dialogue. And Michael, my editor at Carlson, would actually go through the trouble of finding all the original material, because I didn't write it down where I got from the books. I didn't keep a record, so he actually went to the trouble of researching where that material came from, and then trying to use, because in the translation into German, trying to use the right language for those various characters.
Because it's kind of retranslation.
Right.
So many comics do have a kind of avatar figure, figure who the reader can identify with, and through whose eyes the reader can look.
Yes.
I haven't seen that in your work now. Is that on purpose?
I think it is on purpose. I think that is one way to make comics, and it's a way that's very popular, and it's a way that, like Scott McCloud in his book, Understanding Comics. Have you read that? He talks a lot about that. And in my work, I think that in Berlin, and specifically when you come into the city, Martha is sort of your avatar, but then the story kind of opens up and there are many, many more characters. And I'm more interested in that narrative model right now with this story, because it's much more modern and it's much more...
Just a small break, because I have to pass here.
We can cut it in the editing process.
I would say
It would be better we cut it, because if they see me on camera, my gosh, poor people.
You're never on camera?
No, sometimes.
I think what's important to me about the difference there is that when you don't have a central figure with whom the reader can identify, the reader is either, and I don't really believe this happens, put off by the story and doesn't engage with it as much as if they had somebody standing in there for them, or is forced to engage more because they have to put themselves, they have to engage with these other people, these other characters. And I think the main drawback to the whole avatar model, which is very prevalent in video games, for instance, right, where you try to create a main character that the player actually is. The problem with that is that there's no complexity there, or room for complexity, or room for when you try to neutralize your main character. Like Tintin is a perfect example, completely neutralized, like almost asexual, right? Like a young boy, but not really young boy, young man, and has no character beyond being a Boy Scout, right? That is really great for an adventure story, because you want to be that character going on those adventures. But when you're trying to address the nature of human communication and interaction and human relationships, then I think trying to create as rich and broad a cast of characters as possible can be advantageous. So that's one of the reasons I do it.
So in Germany, comics still have some kind of prejudices against them, being only for children or being only pulp literature. So, as an American looking to Germany from the outside and having read about Germany quite a lot, why do you think it is that? Is there a certain time period where a comic culture could have developed but didn't? Or?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Look, I mean, when you look at world cultures all over the world, it's a similar. I mean, Japan might be the exception, but even in Japan, comics are more disposable. It's more genre oriented. It's more like, TV. Manga is very, very much like television in that it's not necessarily something that's going to stay with. And I'm totally generalizing because there are some amazing, incredible works of manga that I consider great works of literature, like amazing, incredible works of art. But generally speaking, manga to me feels a lot like, when I look at a lot of the mainstream stuff, it feels similar to watching television, where there's lots of channels and you don't really remember what you just watched. It's enjoyable, it's entertaining, and it doesn't really stick with you. I think every culture is actually still going through its growth and relationship with comics. I see them as, written language evolved from ideograms, which were pictures, right? So letters come from pictures. And then are abstracted into sounds, and then that becomes written language. Separate from that, you have the evolution of the representational image, where you're trying to actually reproduce what you see, an image. And that works its way all the way up through photography, where you're actually taking a picture and you're capturing this moment in time. And so that I feel like those marks evolved in these two different directions, and they're totally disparate now, where you have this utterly abstract written language, and then the image of like a photograph or CGI animation or whatever, like really high resolution rendering of reality. So they've grown very, very far apart. And I think the amazing thing about comics is that it stitches those two things together. And but I think that I almost describe it as like an evolutionary step that we have to take as a larger population in order to grapple with that. Because we're used to these things being so separate. When they do get combined, you sort of have to learn, when you talk to people who have not read a lot of comics and then they start to read comics, it's often hard because they have to learn how to do it. It's actually an acquired ability. And I just think the more people that will do that, and I think Germany's comics industry has grown in the recent years, I believe, and I know that in America it's like the only segment of publishing that's growing. And like between 2002 and 2007, the gross revenue was went from 75 million to 375 million in a very, very short period of time. So I feel like part of it is like a whole generation of people growing up reading manga, which was an enormous global kind of phenomenon starting, I don't know what, like 10, 15 years ago. And those people now are they're in their late teens and early 20s, the people who were kids when they started reading like Dragon Ball Z and whatever. And they're bringing a whole new interest to the market because they're looking for other kinds of things. So right now it feels like, it's been a very long, slow, as you guys know, because you pay attention to this stuff, it's been a very long, slow uphill, and it continues to be. But I do see, especially in the past few years, some really great signs of acceleration. Like people are kind of catching up. And now what has to happen is more good comics. We have to continue the output. Like we have to get more people making comics, and we have to raise the bar on the quality, because otherwise the readers aren't going to stick around.
We're counting on you on that.
Unfortunately, it's taken me 12 years so far. So,
so you have two big comic companies in the US, Marvel and DC. And you didn't start with them, you started by publishing on your own and publishing with little companies. Artistically speaking, do you think that was positive or negative for you?
Very positive, yeah. I got a grant to do my first book, so I did it entirely myself, from the printing to the advertising to distribution. Like I had to handle everything, and that was a great learning experience because it taught me I'd never want to do it again. I did it. And then from there, so then after I figured that out, I thought, okay, but I love having complete control over my project, so now I need to find a publisher. And then I went to trade shows and started talking to people and made some connections there. And every step of the way, what that experience has allowed me to do is figure it out for myself. And not just the nuts and bolts of how to print and distribute a comic book, but how to use this medium, which has this incredible, I've always had this sense of this amazing untapped potential. Even with all the comics that we see in the world today, I feel like there's still so much stuff that can be explored, not just content-wise, but like in the way that it's actually used, the mechanics of how it fits together. And being able to have complete control of my projects allowed me to really explore that, like to do stuff, to play around with the way comics works in a way that at a mainstream publisher I would not have had the freedom to do. And and I can also decide what it's going to be about. And when I started this project, no mainstream publisher would have touched any of the books I was interested in making.
Okay, so we now have in Germany the second part of Berlin. You are already working on the third part. Do you have any time frame when that will finish? In 2012?
I'm planning to have it out in 4 years.
Nice.
So that's my goal. And given the productivity I managed to achieve in the past year and a half, that is possible. It can be done. So my original plan was to have the whole thing done by the time I turned 40, and I turned 40 in December, so I'm far past my deadline at this point. So I'm desperate, and I also have, there's an endless number of other stories I want to tell. Whether I'm going to draw them myself or get other artists to draw them, my life is already half over, and I feel like I've sort of not even yet. I feel like when Berlin's done, I will have finally done something. Naren was like an experiment, you know, it was like my warm-up. And then Berlin will be like something. I don't know if it'll be good or bad or what, but it'll be like, it'll feel like a work. And it'll be frustrating to me if I don't get to do much else besides that. So the sooner I get it done, the better.
Okay,
Just a small break, because to go there. 2 seconds. Energy is low. And I'll keep to a brief.
You have a very American accent.
Yeah, my brother-in-law is American. My sister lives in the U.S. And I was practically raised with Americans around in Karlsruhe. And there were so many. I was always criticized by my teachers to have this accent. Because there was one, I was always saying, no, it's lieutenant. And he was always saying, no, it's lieutenant. I said, I learned it that way. And one day he came and said, oh, okay, I looked it over. It took part of a book, said, okay, in American, it's really lieutenant. Because he didn't believe me.
Oh, he never heard that before?
No, he didn't believe me. And, well, he believed me, but he insisted on talking British English, and I insisted that I wanted to talk in American English.
True rebel.
Yeah.
Okay, so I understand that you're teaching comics today. How many people do come to your classes? Do you think that there will be enough new artists in new generations, or are you more or less standing there alone, drawing on the chalkboard?
We have every year we get more applicants. So, and this year we have our largest class yet, and in terms of level of talent, it's a higher level. Like every year, we get more and more talented students. So it's very encouraging at this point. I mean, I don't know what the world economic crisis is going to do to comics in the near future. I have my fingers crossed, or I think the school is going to weather it. I don't know how many people are going to want to go into comics given how things are looking right now, but right now at this moment it's really great, and I'm very optimistic, and it's very exciting. Like the enthusiasm and the energy and the creativity that I see students bringing into the classroom is really, really, really great. So I'm very optimistic about it, and I hope to. The hard part for me personally is going to be juggling teaching with doing the work, because I need the regular paycheck. But it's very demanding, you have to do a lot of preparation. And I only teach 2 classes a week, but it's an incredibly, it takes up a lot of time. So I'm personally going to have to figure that out. But the school is a really, really wonderful school. And it's been not only exciting to be part of that community, but it's really been inspirational to me and made me work harder, because when I see all these people, really buckled down and making great work, it's inspiring to me.
So have any of your students published something themselves? Maybe something we've heard about in Germany?
Not in Germany yet. They're all. One of my students last year. There's this annual anthology called The Best American Comics, put out by, I think it's Houghton Mifflin, book publisher. And one of my students showed up in that. But there are some of them that you would definitely be hearing from. But so far they're sort of at the stage in their lives where they're doing mini comics, and some of them actually have book deals at this point, but none of those books have come out yet. So it'll happen, but we don't have anybody. We've only been in operation this is our 3rd year of operation at the school, so we'll give them a little more time.
That sounds promising. So I understand you've been in Germany several times before. What is it, your first time at the Frankfurt Book Fair?
Yes.
Do you think you'll have a chance to take a look at Frankfurt at the city?
I hope so. I looked at my itinerary, and it's pretty packed. I've got 4 days here, and then I'm going to Hamburg, and then I'm going to Berlin for a day each. I have to get back to teach. So hopefully in between interviews and signings, I will have some time to do that. What should I go see?
It's our fault that you don't see Frankfurt.
Oh, yeah,
okay, I already know.
This is why I'm here. I'm not here to see Frankfurt, although I'm sure it's a lovely city. I'm here to do this. So.
I think you should go ahead and look at the Paul's Cathedral. That's
okay.
Something from the building and from the meaning in history as the place of the first German parliament. That is very, very interesting.
Oh, great. Oh, okay, great. That's a great tip. I will try to do that.
So I'm through with my questions. Thank you for.
Thank you.
Well, still I have one question.
Yes.
Are you a little bit of a rebel?
A little bit what?
A little bit of a rebel. Are you
a rebel?
A rebel.
In what way?
Well, you publish your own books. You didn't go to the big publishers. So I guess you're a little bit of a rebel.
I guess so, but I'm not. But one thing I think about a rebel is that I think of a rebel as reacting against something, right? There's the large force and the rebel acts against it. But I always had more of the sense that I was just sort of doing something I wanted to do. And it turns out that it is somewhat in, not opposition, but it is so different from the other thing that I think it's easy to see me that way. But there's in America there's a whole segment of the comics marketplace which is alternative comics, where that's what people do, is their own thing. So and it's big enough now where it doesn't at all feel rebellious. It just feels like another part of the publishing system.
What interests me really when I talk to Americans in these days is the political situation. There will be an election next month.
November
will be
4th.
Next month.
Yeah, November 4th, right, next month. 2 weeks. 3 weeks.
Whom? Can I ask you, whom are you going to vote for?
Barack Obama, there's no question.
Okay.
Anybody who does not vote for Barack Obama is a racist or an idiot. It blows my mind that it's inconceivable. It fills me with rage and anguish and desperation when I see what has happened in our country in the past 8 years. It's like, and the world, because of our country. Like the devastation we have wrought. I mean, when Bush got elected the first time, some people were saying like, and I was one of them, like, with the last time he wanted was him to get elected, but like, the idea was maybe if he gets elected and people see how bad it can get, they'll understand that it was a horrible, horrible mistake. But we never would have thought that if we had understood actually how bad it could have gotten. And in ways that we're not going to be able to untangle for years. Like, there's all this like stuff at the front, like the war and economic crisis, all this stuff at the top, but there's all this stuff down here that nobody's even looking at, what they've been doing for years, like incredible damage to so many different aspects of American culture and life and
Bush got re-elected, so
and that was the real mind blower. And that was such a lesson, and this is why, when I set out to write this book, I was not trying to create like, some kind of parallel relationship between what happened in Germany in the 20s and what's happening in America today, but there are definitely some resonant things, and what I ended up realizing what I was wanting to talk about was more like basic human nature, like the way that fear can be manipulated, the way that cultures can basically be controlled, like large heterogeneous groups of people can actually be manipulated and controlled with really, really simple, basic tools. And they're exactly the same tools that are being used by the right wing in America. And it's just so incredibly upsetting to see it happen. Like in that election, in the last election, the way that they just manipulated everybody's fear of terrorism, that they took 9/11 and they turned it into a political tool and managed, and plus all the fraud that happened. They also completely manipulated the vote. There's no question about that. There's been all these legal cases about it. It's completely manipulated. And now the big thing is like, so the people that manufacture the voting machines, the corporation that manufactures the voting machines, is the same company that did it last time, and they're like buddies with Bush. They're buddies with the right wing. So it's just like, how can we even trust that any of this is going to work? How can I trust it if I go to vote in supposedly, and this is another thing I hate whenever you say the greatest country on earth. That expression just drives me insane. But in the greatest country on earth, like I can't trust whether my vote's going to count. you know?
There's a big discussion about this in Germany and in the whole of Europe too, because in the Netherlands, for example, they used voting machines too. And so a computer club managed to play teachers on those things. So they are not that secure.
Right, no, they're not secure at all. And there's the countless stories in America of the last election where just crazy stories about people leaving them just open and unlocked and leaving, you know, like having them be 24 hours in a building with nobody there to look after them. Just like, I mean, clearly some weird stuff going on.
Just remember one part of The Simpsons where Homer went to vote on the voting machine. He pushed the Democratic candidate and vote for Bush was counted. He pushed again, vote for Bush. At the end, he was eaten by the machine. It was part of the Halloween episode. I think the 10th season.
Oh, sorry.
It was too great.
That's great. Yeah, like great illustration of some of that frustration.
Well,
So I apologize on behalf of the people in America who aren't assholes.
I guess every people has its turn in the course of history.
Yeah.
just look at Berlusconi.
Right.
They are so dumb in Italy. I really know this because my wife is Italian.
Yeah, that's right.
crazy.
Yeah, no.
He was voted on. He was voted against, and now he's on again.
Yeah. Italy is a whole other ballgame.
Just imagine Bush could return in 4 years.
Well, his brother still got a shot.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.